The sawdust hung in the air like golden snow, catching the afternoon light that slanted through the mill's high windows. Marcus wiped his brow with a bandana already stiff with sweat and wood dust, watching the last log of the day roll through the blade. The screaming whine of the saw was a comfort to him now, a sound that filled the spaces where conversation used to be. He'd been working at the mill for 3 years, ever since he'd left the city and everything that reminded him of what he'd lost. At 42, Marcus had grown accustomed to solitude. His cabin sat 2 miles from town, surrounded by the very pines he spent his days cutting and shaping. Most evenings, he'd return home to silence, heat up something simple, and sit on his porch with a beer, watching the forest darken. The other workers had stopped inviting him to the bar on Fridays. They'd learned he preferred his own company, or at least that's what he let them believe. The truth was more complicated. Marcus had built walls around himself after Sarah died, walls constructed from routine and isolation. She'd been gone 5 years now, taken by an illness that moved too fast for medicine to catch. They'd never had children, something they'd always meant to do but kept postponing for the right time that never came. Now he existed in a kind of suspended animation, going through the motions of living without quite participating in life. It was a Tuesday in late September when everything changed. Marcus was in the hardware store, picking up a new blade for his chainsaw, when he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Donnelly?" He turned to find a woman about his age, maybe a bit younger, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that held a peculiar mixture of hope and hesitation. A boy stood beside her, maybe 8 or 9, with his mother's eyes but a different shape to his face, rounder and softer. "I am," Marcus said, his voice rusty from disuse.
I'm Elena Vasquez.
"This is my son, Daniel. This is going to sound strange, but could I talk to you for a few minutes? Maybe buy you a coffee?" Marcus's first instinct was to decline. He had his groceries to get, his routine to maintain. But something in her expression stopped him, a kind of desperate courage that reminded him of Sarah during her final months, when she'd fought so hard to stay present, to make every moment count. "All right," he found himself saying. They walked to the small cafe on Main Street, Daniel trailing behind them, kicking at loose pebbles. Elena ordered coffee for herself and Marcus, hot chocolate for her son, and then they sat at a corner table. She stirred her coffee for a long moment before speaking. "Daniel's father died 2 years ago," she began, her voice low. "Heart attack. He was only 36. No warning, no history of problems. One day he was here, and then he wasn't." Marcus nodded slowly, recognizing the particular pain in her words.
I'm sorry.
"Thank you. We've been managing, the 2 of us. I work at the hospital. I'm a nurse. We have enough money, we have a home. But Daniel..." She glanced at her son, who was focused intently on his hot chocolate. "The school counselor says he's struggling. He doesn't talk much anymore. He doesn't play with other kids. And there's this father-son camping trip coming up in 3 weeks. All the kids are going with their dads, and I can see how much he wants to go, but he won't ask me because he knows it makes me sad that his father isn't here." She paused, gathering her courage. "I heard about you from Janet at the post office. She mentioned you'd lost your wife, that you kept to yourself. I know this is incredibly forward, and you can absolutely say no, but would you consider going on this camping trip with Daniel? Would you pretend, just for that weekend, to be his father?" The request hung in the air between them like smoke. Marcus stared at this woman, this stranger, asking him to step into a role he'd never filled and never would. Every instinct told him to refuse, to retreat to his cabin and his comfortable isolation. But he looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and saw a boy constructing his own walls, building his own fortress of silence against grief. He saw a child becoming what he himself had become, someone who'd forgotten how to reach out, how to let the world in. "Just the camping trip?" Marcus asked. Relief flooded Elena's face. "Yes. Just that weekend. October 10th through 12th. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. He needs this. He needs to see that it's okay to keep living, to have experiences, even without his father." Marcus rubbed his jaw, feeling the stubble there. "I'll do it," he said, surprising himself. "But on one condition." Let me meet with him a couple times before, so we're not complete strangers out there in the woods. That's how it started. The following Saturday, Marcus drove to their small house on Elm Street. Elena answered the door with a nervous smile and invited him into a living room that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. Daniel sat on the couch, looking suspicious and small. "Hey, Daniel," Marcus said, lowering himself into an armchair. "Your mom told you I'm coming on the camping trip with you?" The boy nodded, saying nothing. "I've never been a father," Marcus continued. Deciding honesty was the only approach that made sense. "So I'm probably going to mess this up. But I'm pretty good at camping. I know how to start a fire without matches, how to identify animal tracks, and how to cook fish over an open flame. Think you might want to learn some of that." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. "I guess." They spent that afternoon in Elena's backyard, where Marcus showed Daniel how to tie basic knots: bowline, clove hitch, taut line. The boy's fingers were clumsy at first, but he was determined, working at each knot until he got it right. They didn't talk much, but a comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that comes from shared focus rather than shared history. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus visited 3 more times. He taught Daniel how to use a compass, how to read a topographic map, how to identify edible plants. Slowly, the boy began to talk. Small comments at first, then questions, then actual conversations. He told Marcus about his father, about the games they used to play, about how he couldn't remember what his dad's laugh sounded like anymore. "I'm afraid I'm forgetting him," Daniel admitted one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus set down the camping stove they'd been assembling. "You're not forgetting him. You're just making room for new memories alongside the old ones. That's what we're supposed to do. It doesn't mean he matters less." He realized, as he said it, that he was talking to himself as much as to the boy. The camping trip arrived with perfect October weather. Cool nights, warm days, leaves blazing gold and crimson. 12 fathers and sons gathered at the trailhead, loading backpacks and checking gear. Marcus felt the other men's eyes on him, curious, but no one asked questions. Daniel stayed close to his side, and Marcus found himself naturally placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, the gesture feeling both foreign and right. They hiked 3 miles to the campsite, Daniel keeping pace without complaint. Marcus showed him how to select flat ground for their tent, how to string up their food bag to keep it away from bears, how to gather the right kind of wood for their fire. Other fathers and sons worked on their own sites around them, the woods filling with the sounds of hammering stakes and unzipping bags. That night, they sat around a communal fire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. One father talked about the time he and his son got lost on a hiking trail and found their way back by following a stream. Another shared a funny story about his son's first fishing trip. When it came to Marcus's turn, he felt Daniel tense beside him. "Well," Marcus said slowly, "Daniel and I are still figuring things out. But I'll tell you what I've learned these past few weeks. This kid is brave. He's kind. He works hard at everything he does. And he's teaching me that it's never too late to let people in again." He felt Daniel lean against his side, just slightly, and something in Marcus's chest cracked open, not breaking but opening like a door that had been sealed too long. The weekend passed in a blur of hiking, fishing, and shared meals. Marcus found himself laughing for the first time in years, really laughing, when Daniel accidentally dropped his flashlight in the creek. They tracked deer prints together, identified bird calls, and sat in comfortable silence watching the sunset paint the sky purple and orange. On the last night, as they lay in their tent listening to the forest breathe around them, Daniel spoke into the darkness. "Thanks for pretending," he said quietly. Marcus thought about his answer for a long time. "I'm not sure I was pretending," he finally said. "Maybe we were just being real in a different way." When they returned to town, Marcus expected things to go back to normal. He'd fulfilled his obligation. He could return to his cabin, his solitude, his careful isolation. But on Monday evening, he found himself driving past Elena's house. And then stopping. And then knocking on the door. Elena answered with flour on her hands and surprise on her face. "Marcus, is everything okay?" "I was wondering if Daniel might want to learn how to build a birdhouse," he said. I've got some scrap wood at my place. Her smile was slow and bright. I think he'd love that. Daniel appeared behind his mother, eyes lighting up. Really? Can we make one for cardinals? They're my favorite. Cardinals it is, Marcus agreed. As he drove home that night, Marcus realized he was already planning next weekend. Maybe they could work on that treehouse Daniel had mentioned, or take a day trip to the lake. The walls he'd built around himself hadn't crumbled, but they developed a door, and on the other side was a boy who needed someone to show him how to live again, and a man who'd forgotten the same lesson. Sometimes, Marcus thought, pretending to be something we're not is how we discover who we really are. And sometimes the families we need aren't the ones we're born into, but the ones we choose, building them nail by nail, knot by knot, memory by memory, until pretending becomes unnecessary because somewhere along the way, it became real.